The Avengers Doomsday trailer released and it looked cool. Although something I noticed is that the trailer is pretty much exactly the same as the Infinity War trailer. Our heroes are all in one movie, they're talking of a terrible threat, one they have never faced before, Thor is surprised to see heroes at the end of the trailer, and as well as our heroes narrating the trailer, our villain narrates it too. Only, the first time the villain was built up over several movies, and this time he was not built up at all, and we are only just seeing him for the first time. So yeah, quite a downgrade that, and as much as they try to pull at your nostalgia with returning heroes and the Avengers theme, this trailer actually confirms all of our fears and suspicions. First of all, we are getting a bunch of heroes that don't feel exciting, the most prominent of which are 3 groups of heroes that didn't do well at the box office. First off is the Thunderbolts.
Us?
I know they're supposed to be called the New Avengers, but the fact that everyone's instinct is to call them the Thunderbolts proves how much that didn't work. But we have them, who are a pretty lame slapped-together team whose movie, as I mentioned, didn't do well at the box office, and I thought their film was just mediocre. We also have the Fantastic Four, and their movie was also pretty mediocre, and didn't do that well at the box office either. And these 4 should have had another movie before coming into this film, especially considering that Doctor Doom is supposed to be their villain, yet they've never met him before. In fact, the person that should be telling everyone of this new threat is Reed Richards, not Thor. Already we are seeing the ramifications of their mistakes and fast-tracking of Doom. The Fantastic Four didn't take off with mainstream viewers like they were supposed to, with many saying that most of them are miscast, and the fact that we didn't get a proper introduction and meeting between them and Doom is a downright sin. And then we have the Wakandans, who I always used to like, but after the passing of Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa and the OK Wakanda Forever movie, they just aren't that interesting anymore. So that's a bunch of heroes already who just don't get us excited like the heroes did in Infinity War, because most of these heroes we've only seen once, including Shang-Chi here. The last time we saw him was during the pandemic, and seeing them again just feels very boring. They've not been given the time or quality like the past heroes had leading to Infinity War. In fact, all of them have not even met each other. When we got to Infinity War, most of the heroes already knew each other and had established bonds and unbreakable friendships. But we don't have any of that here in Doomsday. And that makes their gatherings and handshakes in this trailer feel soulless when compared to the Infinity War trailer. And even seeing our Avengers back doesn't feel good as it used to. Ant-Man was great in Endgame, but after seeing him in Quantumania, that movie was so awful, and seeing him beat Kang the Conqueror and easily survive the next Thanos-level threat, all of that makes his return feel tainted and unwelcome. And I hope that they undo the plot armor they gave him when he faces Doom, because they have to undo the optics behind this completely ridiculous and impossible victory. I couldn't even be excited for Thor. Not after what Love and Thunder did to him. Thor Love and Thunder is on my top 10 list of worst superhero movies ever made, and it took a character that we previously felt for and cried for into this stupid buffoon. He didn't even feel like Thor. It felt like they surgically removed his brain from his head and left us with this completely empty shell, an unrecognizable moron who had a love triangle with his hammer and axe. Tell me that doesn't sound like a parody version of Thor that you would get in Scary Movie. But no, this was an official choice from Marvel.
Sorry we've been fighting lately.
So this destroyed Thor for me, and they need to win me back with his character, which I'm sure they will in the movie because the Russo brothers know how to handle Thor the best. But as far as the marketing and trailers go, I just cannot get hyped for him. So hopefully we get retribution for Thor in this movie. I want no more jokes from him. Keep him in this scared and serious mode if you have to, but his joke card has expired. And I'm not excited for Steve Rogers either. Now, completely discounting the fact that this reveal would have been so much more impactful if we didn't already know he was coming back with that lame teaser, Steve Rogers had a beautiful conclusion to his arc with Avengers Endgame. The whole movie came full circle with his very first film in the MCU, and to undo that perfect ending so they can bring him back for a threat that has had no build-up and is appearing for the first time out of nowhere feels like a very rushed and forced way to retrieve him from his perfect ending. In other words, this decision feels very corporate, because this trailer is relying heavily on nostalgia. That's why they're bringing all these characters back to begin with. Remember that article from a couple years ago that said Marvel were panicking over the state of the MCU and were internally discussing bringing the OG Avengers back? Well, this is it. They're back. And they've thrown more OGs in here too with the old X-Men. I mean, Marvel could have introduced their new X-Men in this movie, but they don't feel confident that they can do that right now. So they've pulled in versions of the characters that we already like, and of course, versions that we feel nostalgic towards. And that leads us to the next group of characters. We have the Fox X-Men back. And this is where the roster gets the most interesting. We have Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen back as Xavier and Magneto. We also have Cyclops, who looks really good in the new X-Men costume and with the laser visor that he has. But that's not enough to distract me from the problems of this trailer. And if this scene is what I think it is from the leaks, people are gonna be pissed. All I will say, without spoiling anything, is that after the first scene of the movie happens, we cut to this. Channing Tatum is back as Gambit, but I really hope he isn't that walking parody that he was in Deadpool and Wolverine. That was fine for a joke, sort of, but in a more serious movie like this, I don't think any of us want him to be the dumb comic relief. He needs to be a fully formed character here, the Gambit from the comics. Although, he is so new, so if he dies, will any of us really care? Rebecca Romijn is also back as Mystique, and they've clearly given her a new design. And although I understand the costume, I think they should have kept her face makeup the same, because with all the additions, I couldn't even recognize her. And although she's cool because she's from the OG X-Men, it's just less interesting to see her interacting and fighting with Yelena. Yelena has gotten better as a character in the MCU, I think Thunderbolts did her the best service in that regard, but I'm still not fully on board with her. Natasha was the far superior Black Widow, and seeing the X-Men interact with Marvel's leftovers isn't particularly exciting. It's just making this big crossover feel underwhelming and thrown together. The ironic thing is that Marvel is kind of cheating, because let's be honest, their characters here are not really bringing butts into seats. So they are going back to the far more successful well of 20th Century Fox's characters so they can make their lineup look more appealing. And they're counting on that to help make them a killing at the box office. So they are sort of cheating with this lineup of nostalgic characters by bringing in the Fox X-Men, which, as I've stated in previous videos, are characters that they had nothing to do with. And then we have Doom. Now this is a big character, a figure who is in the background planning his moves, and to just throw him into this movie and have the entire universe rally to take him down without any build-up is just insane, and further proves just how rushed and slapped together this all is. Originally the plan was supposed to be Kang, but they screwed that up by having him get taken out by a bunch of ants. Not to mention he took it like a bitch. Our next Thanos, everybody. So, not surprisingly, that didn't take off. Then Jonathan Majors' incident happened and they fired him, and that's when they pivoted to Doom. And you can really tell that he was thrown in at the last minute. And although this scene looked really awesome, it still feels like it isn't earned. We didn't take our time to get here. Rather than inching their way, Marvel just cheated their way to the goalpost. And throughout the trailer, he's just saying a bunch of typical villain monologuing. Even Thor's speech is typical superhero monologuing. Also, casting Robert Downey Jr. to play Doom is a very obvious and desperate move on Marvel's part. They should have hired a different actor to play this role. Some people wanted Mads Mikkelsen, but I think he's a boring choice. He'll play the role exactly as you think he will. I would have preferred Cillian Murphy, because as well as being a great actor, from Batman Begins to Red Eye, he put on the crazy eyes like no one I've ever seen. And then in Inception, he completely turned off the crazy eyes. And for Doom, who keeps his face covered with his mask, you need someone who can really act with their eyes, and someone who can transform their eyes. But forcing in Doom right now just feels like a panic move, and a misguided rash attempt at course correcting. Because let's not kid ourselves, they are playing it super safe by casting Robert Downey Jr. here. Anyone who liked Robert Downey Jr. in the MCU is gonna show up to this movie just to see his return. And to make him the big bad of the MCU, clearly that's gonna get people curious. So going by this trailer, this looks at best like it'll just be a fun superhero action film. And Avengers Infinity War and Endgame were more than that. They were the two-part conclusion to a 10-year-long story. And Avengers Doomsday is none of those things, yet it's trying to act like it is, and it just feels like we've gotten this movie after a road filled with filler and disappointments. Here's hoping with Captain America he is really Captain Hydra. The Russos referenced the evil Captain America in Avengers Endgame, and that's the only way I'll be accepting of him coming back. And that is the smart kind of twist that would give me some faith in this movie. Because whereas at first Tony Stark and Steve Rogers were the main good guys, seeing them as the main bad guys would be a cool twist. And it's the multiverse, so they could do that. But there's no knowing if they will do that, I'm just speculating here. Overall, the movie looks like it's just all about nostalgia and spectacle. It's a cheap way to get people to the cinemas and to make a ton of money at the box office. Although, given just how large the budget is for Doomsday, we'll have to see if they make their money back. Because if word of the $700 million budget is true, they will have to make around $1.7 billion just to break even. And can a nostalgia play like this be effective enough to bring that much money in? We will have to see. But overall, every concern we had about Doctor Doom being brought in too quick, this movie being a big cameo and nostalgia fest, the lackluster roster of post-Endgame Avengers that mainstream audiences didn't connect with like the OGs, and so much more, this trailer just proved that all of those concerns are actually in this movie. And that's a problem that the film has to face. And although I'm sure this movie will make a ton of money, at least out of sheer curiosity and wanting to rewatch the action scenes, once the smoke and mirrors of the nostalgia settles, I do wonder what people will think of these movies once they sit back and really process the story of what they've just watched. The only thing they can really do is surprise me, because this movie really does come across as one big corporate move rather than a story that needs to be told. Only time will tell.